Alright, thanks for tuning in to my draft 2 of my semester project. My video, just to recap, my semester project here is learning a new skill. And the skill I've, a hobby if you will, chosen to start teaching myself and learning via online tutorials and through some expertise of my local leather store guys. I've decided to start working with a product called Kydex. And Kydex is plastic, which we're actually talking about here in chapter 13 this week. But I won't get into that quite yet because there's a lot in this video that I want to cover, and I don't want to make it a 2-hour long video, so I'm going to try to go as quickly as possible and stay as focused as possible on my holster projects and what I've gone ahead and done as far as the learning curve and the things that I've learned about design so far in this semester and how I'm incorporating that into my idea for my project, or my semester project. So the couple things that I want you to keep in mind that I'm going to try to be doing over the explanation of this quick, short, and sweet video is identify how design is used to convey ideas, create design elements, or create design using elements and principles of historical periods, and integrate design elements and principles in a creative work. And so that being said, I'd like you to keep a couple things in mind and the things that we've learned so far about design elements and principles. And that design elements are color, shape, texture, space, and form. And examples of design principles are unity versus harmony, or unity and harmony, balance, hierarchy, dominance and emphasis, as well as similarity and contrast. Just to give a few examples of that. So, before I continue any more with this video, of course, is about holsters, and it is about so far what I've been teaching myself and learning about the firearms holster and what is needed. And you can kind of see in the background here, these are quick sketches and kind of design layouts or blueprints, if you will, of the holsters that I've been designing for this particular firearm. And when we're talking about firearms, I want to keep a couple things very clear. First and foremost, firearms are not a toy. I'd like to go over quick. For some of you this might be a refresher, but for some of you, you may have never heard these before. The 4 rules of firearm safety. The 4 rules of firearm safety are: the gun is always loaded. Treat all guns, or all firearms, as if they are always loaded. For the purposes of this video, of course, this is going to be a free and clear, safety checked firearm. So physically and visually, there is no loaded round whatsoever in the firearm itself, and as well as this magazine, if you will. But for the purposes of this video, I would like to keep the firearm close by so I can show you guys exactly why I designed the holsters the way I did. Just as a visual example. But that being the first rule of firearm safety, is treat all firearms as if they are loaded. The second rule is never point the gun at anything that you don't intend to destroy or kill. Third rule of firearm safety is always keep your finger off the trigger. And the fourth rule of gun safety is know what your target is and what is beyond your target. So keeping those safety elements in mind, I'd like to point out the two basic things or requirements that a firearm holster needs. And this, keeping in mind what we've learned about design so far this semester, the firearm holster is designed to do 2 basic things, and I'll use this one as an example. The firearm is designed to be carried by law enforcement and military personnel for personal protection and public safety. That is a given. We see lots of gunfights and stuff in the movies, but most of that is Hollywood, so we're not getting into any of that. But the 2 things that you really need out of a firearms holster is, one, you need to keep it on your body. You need to keep the firearm in close proximity to your person, so it's accessible when you need it. The second basic need, if you will, of a firearms holster is that it needs to cover the trigger guard. The trigger guard for all firearms is an external frame that covers and protects the trigger from accidental discharge. So things that bump it or things that could get pinched in a way that could actually depress the trigger and fire the firearm, you want to make sure that is completely covered. And for that is the second need of the firearms holster. The firearms holster needs to cover that trigger guard, because if the trigger is accidentally depressed, you could accidentally discharge that firearm, shoot yourself, or shoot the ground, shoot somebody you don't want to, or something you don't want to. So those are the two big basic necessities of a firearms holster. And besides that, I'm also going to be getting into again in the background here, and kind of pan back and forth, and actually I'll just cover these quick because we're already here. The different things that I've designed into using these holsters, or into the design of building these holsters. So I think I'm going to start up here in the top left corner, and I'll use this as an example. So first and foremost, you can kind of see that the outlines represent exactly what I've kind of cut out as a stencil, and actually used stencils to make these out of Kydex. And in my follow-up video, I'd actually like to bring you guys out into my shop and show you how I make the holster while I'm going over some of these same basic things. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to show you what I've designed into these holsters. The first one is size. Size needs to be taken into consideration based on how it's being worn for a lot of different purposes, but of course the biggest one being you need to, again, retain the firearm on your body, and you also need to keep that trigger guard covered. So size is of key importance, as well as you don't want to make it too big so that it's not comfortable to carry. The trigger guard is covered again, but in this particular example, and you can see I've made some highlights here, the trigger guard is covered, as well as the magazine release on a firearm. And for this particular example, the magazine release is right here, and the slide safety, which is right here indicated on this drawing, are both left free and open. So you can see that there's the magazine release and the slide safety. And the reason why those aren't covered is because if someone were going to need to, say, take your firearm from you or safety check it or whatever the case might be, it is very important to have these two features accessible while the firearm is still covering that trigger guard. So that's just a couple of extra points to that being said. Another one of the things that I've designed into this particular picture is something that I kind of learned and picked up after I designed my first leather holster. You can see the differences in shapes here. This additional flange right here is of extreme importance, and what they call that is a sweat guard. But for all intents and purposes, what this also does is when this is riding inside your belt, this makes sure that you don't get your shirt or anything caught into where the trigger guard goes into the holster and the trigger itself accidentally discharging the firearm again. So those are huge safety concerns, and a couple of things that I've designed into this particular firearm holster. If I pan over here to the right quick, you'll see that the belt line and the belt depth for where this holster is going to be carried is just something else I designed, if you will, into the holster, is right where this clip ends. So the clip height, or the belt clip height, has to be taken into consideration for rideability and comfort. The belt clip and size, based on what I've seen on other professionally manufactured and sold firearms holsters out there, a spring metal clip is by far a very popular choice. They come pre-manufactured and you can get them very, very cheap. And these examples that I have in front of us today are actually all from Tandy Leather Supply, and these are the same guys who helped me kind of go through and figure out exactly how I wanted to do these particular firearm holsters. They're a great resource and a pretty local business too. They've got a location here in Roseville and another location in Bloomington. Really great guys, really great company, and primarily they deal in leather, but they also carry the Kydex manufacturing materials and tools and stuff like that, including eyelets, rivets, and here's some examples of the eyelets and the screws and materials that I used. So again, getting back into the design of this diagram over here, the spring clip is definitely a part of that design. The arrows here indicate the movability, which is definitely something you need to keep in mind. It's very, very nice feature to be able to move back and forth according to if your belt line or your waistline isn't that comfortable. You can actually move this around and adjust the cant. Cantilever, you can adjust the cant if you want of the firearm, and that is designed, of course, to be inside the belt. We're talking about IWB firearms holster here, which IWB stands for inside the waistband. So that is something else to be taken into consideration, is comfortability. The flexible position and adjustment in the cant is very, very important when we're talking about that kind of stuff. So It's just design elements that I've worked around choosing the clip first, or choosing this the retention, keeping it on your body, choosing the belt clip first and building the holster around that, as well as building the holster, of course, and obviously around the firearm. If I pan down from there, I'd like to go over a couple of these quick things and get this all into frame here. You can see I've drawn an outline of my hand, and the outline of my hand and the outline here of how your hand actually goes over and accesses the firearm is something to keep in consideration. You got to have yourself enough finger clearance so you're not scraping and digging your knuckles in when reaching for this firearm. And I've designed these holsters based on, like I said, hundreds of different examples of other manufactured firearms holsters, as well as needs that I've been given to by the particular owner of this firearm is in the law enforcement profession. And he was really looking for an off-duty concealed carry, sometimes undercover, but off-duty concealed carry option for his firearm. So the retention parts, we kind of covered that already, but the retention parts, and there is both, without getting too deep into this, there is positive and negative retention. And retention inside the holster is how the holster actually holds the firearm in place. And if you hear audibly, there is a click when the firearm is inserted and then released from that holster. So that is again, without getting into it too deep, the retention basically in this holster design is around, it kind of grips the trigger guard itself. And you can see the indentations here. Hopefully that kind of picks up on the video without having to focus back and forth too much. So we're talking about retention, and the trigger guard is the main point of retention when designing this firearm holster, as well as the ejection port. And the ejection port on this particular firearm, I'm not sure if you can see that, is this part up here. So that's another point where the actual holster kind of comes in and forms to the actual firearm, and I'll show you this as an example. It's a little bit more pressed. There you go, I can kind of see that better. So there's an example of the ejection port being a retention point, as well as the trigger guard itself. The inside diameter is examples of positive retention, or I'm sorry, negative retention. I don't quite remember. Next, I'd like to address here the eyelets and the eyelet position and placement. To keep this actual, again, this is a pretty flexible material, and in order to keep this Kydex material formed around the firearm, you actually need a way of keeping the two pieces together. In this particular example, I have chosen to use eyelets, and the eyelets actually go through both pieces and keep the two pieces of sandwich Kydex together. The placement on this particular firearm too has a lot to do with the retention and the flexibility of how stiff or rigid the holster grips onto that firearm. So that actually took quite a few times to figure out exactly the perfect place to put these eyelets, or to keep this retention. And an example of my last holster I've done here, I've actually inserted an adjustable retention knob. I'm not sure how well that's picking up. This is actually a screw instead of two eyelets with a semi squishy piece of leather sandwiched in between them. So you can actually tighten this up or loosen it, which is something I've designed into my third and final holster that I've been making so far. So kind of covered those things, and swinging over here, probably actually should have started with this one. Besides the shape and size, there's a couple other elements and principles that I've designed into this holster based on clearance. And I kind of talked about how your finger has to clear here in order to access the firearm. But on the other hand, there's also, I call this or they call this in the profession, or in the business, if you will, the front sight clearance. And the front sight clearance, I'm going to see if we can pick that up. Looking down the sights, there's a double notch in the back and there's one single notch up front. And in order to retain the firearm properly without damaging the holster on the draw, like I've actually learned, let's see if that comes in, with this leather holster, I did not design accidentally a front sight clearance into this holster. And that in turn scraped a lot of material from that leather holster on the front sight, and was actually, well, obviously it's just really not good. So leather being a flexible material but still being formable is one of the reasons why I decided to start working with this Kydex material. You can see through that example, the sight is clear, is a front sight clearance, is that aspect of the design that I've built into this. This is also called the spline of the holster. And let's see if I can do this in a way that makes sense. But if you needed to access your firearm and the firearm holster wasn't on your body, 2 points of grip for your opposing hand would be the spline as well as the trigger guard down here, and that's why I intentionally left a lot of material down here so you can actually access the firearm and pull it clear without fumbling around and trying to grip it. That's just something small, but at the same time it's very important in safety checks, and if you're for whatever reason somebody needed to safety check or clear your firearm if you're entering like a gun range, sometimes people need to check your firearm. So those 2 points of contact when withdrawing the pistol from the holster are very important to keep in mind. So that's covering the front sight clearance and the spline, and then the trigger guard hook is what I called this point. As well as I kind of designed, I'm not sure if this is all picking up, my camera is kind of slow today, but these two corners right here are kind of pointing at those two areas of contact where you'd want to grip. So that being said, I've kind of covered actually quite a bit more than I was thinking I was going to cover, and I'm sorry for kind of rambling and not taking too many breaths. I should have taken a little bit more breaths, but this is actually my 8th time trying to attempt to make this video and work it all out in a perfect smooth operation, as I don't quite have video editing software to piece different clips of videos that I like together. So that's something else I had to design into the making of this video, and I'll pan over here to my notes. I've actually got about 12 pages of notes as well as the requirements that we need for the semester project, but designing this video on how to explain all these different things in one smooth take was another design feat in itself. So I think I've pretty much covered everything that I've wanted to cover. The one thing that I would like to really address is actually go over the main point of this video, is incorporating the elements and principles of design that we've learned this semester into a created art. And part of that, again, with the second core learning objectives, is create designs using elements and principles of specific historical periods. So if you will, I'd just like to go over a few of the things that I've learned this semester about design and why I incorporated that into these holsters and into this project, into this hobby, or this new skill that I've learned, if you will. So I'd just like to go over that stuff at this point. So using what I've learned about and from design this semester will help me better articulate and express what I am building into my designs. The background and history of design through exactly the craft and art and the PBS documentary had an influence, but also a large part of our reading material by Raisman, the book we had this semester called History of Modern Design. I've pulled specific examples and quotes from our text to help emphasize and better explain our core learning objectives. Identify how design is used to portray ideas. Interpreted broadly, Kydex is a new materials and process in an expanding market. So far, Kydex holster industry is largely a self-contained craft community, with only a few turning into an industrial process. Using Fordism as an example, the creation of assembly line is not something I've been able to do per se so far, as it is outside my abilities. As well as creating my own vacuum press is a very expensive endeavor. Those are other ways to make and form Kydex holsters that are really, really expensive, and for people who are really getting into the design and mold making of Kydex holsters as a home-based business, which is a perfect example of this would be Filster Holsters. I encourage you to check him out on YouTube or on the internet. Just do a Google search for Filster Holsters. That's P-H-L-S-T-R, Filster. And he is actually a guy who left the automotive industry and started making Kydex firearms holsters about 3 or 4 years ago. And his company is again called Filster. But since the beginning of his design process, he's documented every single thing that he's learned about Kydex and the Kydex forming and making Kydex holsters, and he's put all those as available do-it-yourself how-to helpful hint videos on YouTube for people to learn and follow, and that's exactly what I did in helping me get my own processes started here. So looking back into some of the examples from our book, Mercer was a do-it-yourselfer, and so am I. Frederick W. Taylor's Scientific Management will help me explain the dominoes needed to take place and what times and why in the processes that I have learned and honed. And that's something that I'd like to cover in the second video when I'm actually making the holster in front of you for you guys. And it's pretty exciting. I'm actually having a lot of fun with this, but it's something that I'm going to have to incorporate into the final draft of this process or this project. Other terminology like industrial art and focuses from others like Edgar Brandt's passion for the metals technology, I'll explain further the ideas of futurism, less to nature than to the machine-made beauty of production like the automobile or the firearm. Mechanical selection, where ornaments and decorations are distractions. These are very specifically designed, simple holsters. They're designed to do those exact two things that I've covered before, and they're not decorative. They're not pretty by any means. Well, I guess it depends on your definition of what is aesthetically pleasing or attractive. But these aren't, decorated, really fancy leather holsters by any means. This is just a simple plastic leather holster, or I'm sorry, an advancement of a leather holster using a very inexpensive Kydex plastic thermoform polymer material. Decorations as distractions, and that was something from mechanical selection. Let's see what else. Streamlining is something else we heard and learned about in our book. And streamlining, if you kind of start from left to right, my first prototype was out of leather. My second prototype, I actually got these mixed up, was a two-piece materials two pieces of Kydex that I used eyelets to retain, and I wasn't really happy with that design. So I moved on to a one-piece folded over sandwich style Kydex holster. There's one piece of Kydex. And my final example is this black one. It's really actually hard to tell, but there's a few differences that I've actually built into this one for my first couple, but that the major one being the adjustable retention up front. Let's see, decision making was directed almost exclusively towards achieving maximum efficiency for production and to minimize the cost of labor. Again, as this is something that I'm learning, the only cost so far that I have incurred is the cost of tools and materials. So the cost of labor isn't that big of a deal, of course, in my specific circumstance, but if I were to start this as a home-based business, then definitely my labor costs would be of extreme importance trying to make these a production for sale. I'll show my integrated design elements and principles in a created work using a blueprint or diagram I drew, focusing attention on what is needed from said holster and why it is important to design is based on function. An example of this would be safety, and I address safety in the beginning of this video because safety needs need to be addressed first and foremost when designing a firearms holster, because an accidental discharge could seriously injure or kill someone or yourself if not properly retained with the trigger guard covered. Other broader concepts such as beauty and simplicity are incorporated into my simple yet effective designs. Finally, at least so far, comparing my designs to my inspirations, works from other Kydex holster manufacturers, and what I've learned, I will explain the elements and principles of design, and we've kind of gone over those: balance, emphasis, contrast, harmony, color, shape, texture, space, and form, etc., in my work, and share that work through my video, and we'll put on YouTube eventually. That's just kind of an overview of the reply that I made to Mr. Springborg on further explaining what elements and things of design that I've learned into this work of art. So I just want to wrap up quick this short video and show you some of the examples that I've been basing my works of art off. So I'm kind of focus in on that. Here's an example. This is actually Ryman holsters, R-Y-M-A-N. This is one of the first holsters that I tried duplicating, if you will, and kind of see about getting the glare into there. Zoom in so you guys can focus a little bit better on that. So if you see, he used, in my first example here, I actually used a two pieces of Kydex in my first prototype. to make a sandwich, basically, if you will. They call this a pancake style holster. And I took that example or inspiration off of looking at pictures like this. And if you do a quick Google search on Kydex firearms holsters or Kydex holsters in general, you actually start seeing a lot of examples of really intrinsic works of art, actually. And some people get really fancy in their design. You can see there's one right here of the Punisher skull. There's other ones in different colors, and some people use red in their Kydex material or in their Kydex processes. Some people include other design elements. Here's some examples of some red bars. There's a Batman symbol there, and you can do your own Google search on Kydex holsters. And here's another example. This is just insane. That is an actual Kydex holster that is designed to look, I believe, like a skull, if you can kind of see that. And that's just all using Kydex. And that is a Pinterest picture that I just kind of clicked on. But that's pretty amazing to me. That's pretty fascinating. That's kind of what sucked me into this design idea in the first place, is being able to do this because it's so cheap and seemingly so easy. I wanted to actually see if I could do it. And I think I'm getting there. So there, if you, again, just do a quick Google search on Kydex holsters. Again, Kydex is spelled K-Y-D-E-X. And I just wanted to go over, again, I brought this guy up earlier, but if you go to filsterholsters.com, here's an example. Here's actually his website. It's P-H-L-S-T-E-R, and he's got all of your do-it-yourself resources in the form of YouTube format on how he actually made and started his own home-based business in his garage with the support of his wife and family members. And he's actually become very, very successful. To date, I believe, if you click on the website of his, you have to actually click on a sidebar that says, I understand that holsters ordered may take 8 to 12 weeks for completion and delivery. So if that's true, and based on what I've learned about making these Kydex holsters, is that if I can make one of these Kydex holsters in a little under an hour or two, he is really, really backlogged, and I would assume from that, being backlogged that far, he's extremely busy, which tells me that he is what's the term I'm looking for? Very successful in his venture. So I wanted to cover those, and again, a couple of my my inspirations. Other ones too, I did want to cover or bring this up. I haven't typed these up yet. I'm gonna try to zoom out here so you can actually see. Wide. Here's one of the pages of my notes. On this whole left-hand column are all companies that I've researched and kind of taken design aspects and principles from in designing my own Kydex holster. And some of the big ones, again, would be Filster holsters. I've also looked at Blade Tech holsters, Raven Concealment, G-Code, Insane Kydex Creations, Multiholsters.com, Ares Armor, Strongside Holsters, Rain Tactical, Chaos and Warrior Concealment, Bravo Concealment, CompTac, Ryman Holsters is one I just showed you guys, as well as the Filster, Crossbreed. I mean, I can go on and on and on with all these different online small companies, small home-based companies that are pretty successful in their adventures. So that is going to be a wrap-up for my project, my semester project draft number 2. Please tell me what you guys think. I'd really like a lot more feedback than what I got from my initial first draft. And let me know if you guys liked the video or what I didn't answer. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Thanks for watching.